The morning sun cast its golden rays across the bustling city streets. Cars honked, coffee shops hummed with life, and hurried footsteps echoed on the sidewalks. Among the crowd, Ethan Cole moved with quiet confidence. Dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, his polished shoes clicked steadily against the pavement. He looked every bit the successful professional he was, a civil rights attorney respected across the state for his fearless pursuit of justice. Ethan had just finished breakfast at Tony's Diner, a cozy place he visited regularly. The staff greeted him by name and knew his usual order: scrambled eggs, turkey bacon, and a side of fruit. As he left the diner, he smiled at Tony, the owner, and promised to return soon. Walking towards his silver sedan parked a block away, Ethan checked his phone. A message from his younger sister, Layla, brought a smile to his face. She reminded him of their family dinner planned for that evening. Ethan typed a quick reply, assuring her he wouldn't miss it. As he approached his car, two police officers caught his attention. Their uniforms were crisp, their expressions hard to read. Officer Jensen, a burly man with a sharp jawline, was flanked by Officer Carter, who kept a hand near his holster. They locked eyes with Ethan, their gaze unwavering. "Excuse me, sir," Jensen called out, his tone sharp. Ethan stopped and turned to face them, maintaining his composure. "Good morning, officers. How can I help you?" "ID, please," Jensen demanded without preamble. Ethan's brow furrowed slightly. "May I ask why?" Jensen's smirk was cold. "You match the description of someone we're looking for. Just hand over your ID." Ethan nodded, keeping his movements deliberate. He retrieved his wallet and passed over his license. "Here you go. I'd still like to know what this is about." Carter took the ID and glanced at it before handing it to Jensen, who scrutinized it as though it might hold secrets. "What are you doing in this area?" Jensen asked. "I just had breakfast," Ethan replied, gesturing towards the diner. "Is there a problem?" "We've had reports of suspicious activity," Jensen said, his smirk widening. "You seem to fit the bill." Ethan inhaled deeply, the familiar weight of racial profiling settling on his shoulders. "Officers, I assure you, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm heading to work. I'm an attorney, and I have a meeting shortly." Carter scoffed. "A lawyer, huh? That's convenient." The tension thickened. Ethan considered his options carefully. He'd been taught to remain calm in situations like this, but he could feel the danger escalating. "Step away from the car," Jensen ordered suddenly. Ethan hesitated. "Officers, I've complied with everything you've asked. Is this really necessary?" Jensen's face hardened. "You don't get to decide what's necessary. Step back." Reluctantly, Ethan raised his hands and took a step away from the vehicle. But as soon as he moved, Jensen grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back. Ethan grimaced in pain as Carter joined in, shoving him to the ground. "What are you doing?" Ethan protested, his voice steady despite the discomfort. "I'm not resisting." "You're under arrest for resisting arrest," Jensen snapped, tightening the cuffs around Ethan's wrists. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Among them was Mrs. Lorraine King, an elderly woman who lived in the building across the street. She recognized Ethan and shouted from her balcony, "Leave him alone! He's done nothing wrong." Others began recording the scene on their phones. A young man muttered to his girlfriend, "This is so wrong. He didn't do anything." Ethan caught sight of the phone's recording and clung to a shred of hope. Maybe this footage would reveal the truth. Maybe it would hold the officers accountable. As they led Ethan to the squad car, he glanced back at the crowd, his voice carrying over the din. "This isn't over," he said firmly. The words lingered as the police car pulled away, leaving the stunned crowd behind. Inside the vehicle, Ethan's mind raced. He had done everything right, remained calm, complied, and stood his ground within the limits of the law. Yet, none of it mattered. The sting of injustice burned deeper than the physical discomfort of the cuffs biting into his wrists. He closed his eyes, replaying the events, already beginning to form a plan. The police station was a stark contrast to the vibrant city outside. Cold, gray walls framed the dimly lit booking area, where officers moved briskly, some glancing briefly at Ethan as he was led in by officers Jensen and Carter. Ethan remained composed, though the cuffs chafed against his wrists. He had been through tough moments in his career, but being treated like a criminal for simply existing as a black man in a nice neighborhood hit differently. He kept his head high, refusing to let the humiliation show. At the booking desk, a tired officer, Mark Peterson, barely glanced up from his screen. "Name," he muttered. "Ethan Cole," Jensen answered before Ethan could speak. Peterson's fingers paused over the keyboard, his brow furrowing slightly. He glanced up, giving Ethan a longer look, then back at the computer. Something in his demeanor shifted, but he didn't say a word. Instead, he motioned for Jensen and Carter to proceed. "Take him to fingerprinting," Peterson said, his tone curt. As they walked through the station, Ethan's sharp eyes noted the dynamics around him. Some officers gave him curious glances, others avoided eye contact entirely. It was clear he didn't fit the usual profile of their detainees: disheveled, desperate, or visibly shaken. Ethan's calm and dignified presence unsettled them. At the fingerprinting station, Ethan stood still as his prints were taken. He stayed silent, knowing that anything he said could be twisted against him. "Make yourself comfortable," Carter sneered as they shoved him into a holding cell at the back of the precinct. Ethan didn't respond. He scanned the small cell, a narrow bench bolted to the wall, a metal toilet in the corner. The air smelled of disinfectant with an undercurrent of mildew. He sat down, his mind already piecing together a plan. Meanwhile, in her office upstairs, Lieutenant Grace Harper sifted through a stack of files. A recent transfer to the precinct, Harper was known for her sharp instincts and no-nonsense attitude. She'd already noticed unsettling patterns in the department: the whispered conversations, the cliques among certain officers, and an undercurrent of something rotten. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock. Officer Parker, a young and eager officer, stepped inside, his face tight with concern. "Lieutenant Harper, can I talk to you for a moment?" Harper leaned back in her chair. "What's on your mind, Parker?" "It's about the guy they just brought in," Parker said, lowering his voice. "The one Jensen and Carter arrested, Ethan Cole. I think I know who he is." Harper raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "I saw his name in an article a couple of weeks ago," Parker continued, glancing nervously at the door. "He's not just some guy. He's a civil rights attorney, a big one. He's been involved in some major cases against police departments for misconduct. If this goes public—" Harper's eyes narrowed. She had heard the name Ethan Cole before, though she hadn't connected the dots until now. Her gut told her there was more to this story, and she wasn't about to let it slide. "Thank you, Parker," she said, her voice measured. "I'll take it from here." Harper made her way down to the holding cells, her heels clicking sharply against the tiled floors. As she passed the front desk, she caught sight of Jensen and Carter chatting smugly. "Jensen," she called, her tone brisk. The officer turned, a hint of annoyance flickering across his face. "Yes, Lieutenant?" "I need to speak with your detainee," Harper said. Jensen hesitated. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" "That's what I'm here to find out," Harper replied coolly, brushing past him. When Harper reached Ethan's cell, she paused, observing him through the bars. He sat with his back straight, his hands resting on his knees. His demeanor wasn't one of defeat, but of quiet determination. "Mr. Cole," Harper said, her voice even, "I'm Lieutenant Grace Harper. I'd like to ask you a few questions." Ethan stood, meeting her gaze. "Of course, Lieutenant. I'll answer whatever I can." She unlocked the door and stepped inside, closing it behind her. "I've been told you resisted arrest, which led to your detainment. I'd like to hear your side of the story." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Lieutenant Harper, I complied with every instruction given to me by Officers Jensen and Carter. I asked why I was being stopped, and that seemed to be enough to escalate things. Before I knew it, I was on the ground, handcuffed, and accused of resisting. I have done nothing wrong." Harper studied him carefully, noting the steadiness in his voice and the clarity of his account. "I see," she said after a moment. "Thank you for your honesty." She turned on her heel and exited the cell, her mind racing. Upstairs, Harper confronted Jensen and Carter in the briefing room. "Care to explain why you arrested Ethan Cole?" she demanded, her tone sharp. Jensen shrugged. "He fit the description of a suspect in the area. When we questioned him, he got defensive. Defensive? Harper echoed, her voice rising. Or did he simply ask why he was being stopped? Carter crossed his arms, his expression smug. We followed protocol, Lieutenant. If he's so innocent, he can prove it in court. Harper's gaze hardened. Do you have any idea who you've arrested? Their silence was answer enough. That man is a prominent civil rights attorney, Harper said, her voice low and cutting. He's worked on cases that have exposed corruption in departments like ours. And if you think for 1 second that this is going to end quietly, you're delusional. Jensen's smirk faltered. Harper turned to leave, throwing one last warning over her shoulder. I'll be reviewing everything about this arrest. If I find even a shred of misconduct, you'll be the first to answer for it. As Harper returned to her office, she made a call to a contact she trusted at the federal level. This is Lieutenant Grace Harper, she said when the line connected. I need information about Ethan Cole and any ongoing investigations he might be part of. The voice on the other end paused before responding. Lieutenant, if Ethan Cole is in your custody, you need to tread carefully. He's a key asset in a federal investigation into systemic corruption. His arrest could jeopardize months of work. Harper's stomach dropped. Understood, she said grimly. As she hung up, Harper realized the gravity of the situation. Ethan Cole wasn't just a victim of racial profiling. He was the key to unraveling a web of corruption. And now, the entire station was caught in the crosshairs. The sun hung high over the city as tension simmered outside the police station. A crowd had gathered, growing larger by the minute. At first, it was a handful of people, neighbors and bystanders who had witnessed Ethan Cole's arrest and were outraged by what they saw. Word spread quickly, fueled by videos posted online. By midday, the steps of the station were packed. Protesters held signs reading "Justice for Ethan" and "Stop Racial Profiling." Chants echoed down the streets. No justice, no peace. Release Ethan Cole now. At the front of the crowd, Naomi Blake, a seasoned community leader, took charge. A petite woman with a commanding presence, Naomi's voice cut through the noise. We're here to demand answers, she said to a group of reporters. Ethan Cole is a respected civil rights attorney. His arrest wasn't just an attack on him, it's an attack on justice itself. Inside the station, the atmosphere was equally tense. Officers avoided eye contact as they moved through the halls, their usual camaraderie replaced by uneasy glances. Lieutenant Grace Harper sat in her office, the phone pressed to her ear. This is out of control, she said to Agent Collins, the federal contact she'd called earlier. The crowd's growing, and the media's all over this. What can you tell me about Cole's investigation? Collins's voice was calm but firm. Ethan Cole has been gathering evidence on systemic corruption in law enforcement. His work has already led to indictments in 2 other cities. Your precinct has been on our radar, and his arrest just confirmed our suspicions. I suggest you tread very carefully. Harper's stomach churned. What are my options here? The officers involved are stonewalling me, and the chief is too concerned about optics to take decisive action. Collins sighed. The best option is to release Cole immediately and cooperate fully. Anything less will make this worse, for everyone. Downstairs, Ethan sat in his holding cell, the muffled chants from outside reaching his ears. He knew the power of public outcry. He'd fought for clients in similar situations before. But being on the other side of the bars felt surreal. His thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. Ethan. He looked up to see Naomi Blake peering through the cell's small window. Naomi, Ethan said, surprised. What are you doing here? What do you think? She replied, her voice firm. We're out there fighting for you. Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile. Thank you. But be careful. They'll use anything to discredit you. Naomi's expression softened. Let me worry about that. You just hang in there. As Naomi disappeared from view, Ethan leaned back against the wall, his mind racing. This wasn't just about him anymore. The crowd outside represented something much larger, a collective demand for accountability. In the briefing room, Chief Robert Doyle paced back and forth, sweat beading on his forehead. What's the situation outside? He barked at Harper, who stood calmly at the doorway. The crowd's nearing 500 people, Harper replied, and the media's asking for a statement. Doyle slammed his fist on the table. Damn it. This is a PR nightmare. What were Jensen and Carter thinking, arresting someone like Ethan Cole? They weren't thinking, Harper said bluntly. And now we're paying the price. Doyle glared at her. What do you suggest? Release him, Harper said firmly. Apologize publicly. And start cooperating with the federal investigation. Doyle's face darkened. Federal investigation? What are you talking about? Harper hesitated, then decided it was time for full transparency. Ethan Cole is a key figure in a federal probe into police corruption. His arrest could blow this department apart if we don't handle it correctly. Doyle's jaw tightened. You're telling me the feds are already watching us? Yes, Harper said. And every second we keep him here makes it worse. Outside, the tension escalated. Protesters chanted louder, their voices a roar against the silence of the station. Naomi took the microphone from a local activist and addressed the crowd. Ethan Cole has dedicated his career to fighting for justice, she said passionately, and now he needs us to fight for him. We will not back down until he's released and the officers responsible are held accountable. Cheers erupted, and the crowd pressed closer to the barricades. Officers stationed outside exchanged nervous glances, their hands hovering near their batons. Suddenly, a young protester, Marcus, stepped forward, holding his phone high. You see this? He shouted, live-streaming the event. This is what happens when you speak truth to power. They silence you. But we're not going anywhere. The crowd surged forward, their frustration boiling over. Harper stood at a window overlooking the scene, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She could feel the weight of the moment, the fury of the crowd, the fear inside the station, and the crushing responsibility on her shoulders. Her phone buzzed. Harper, Collins's voice came through. The crowd's growing. Do you have control of the situation? Barely, she admitted. Then it's time to act, Collins said. Release Cole. And make sure your department understands this. Any further misconduct will have federal consequences. The decision was made. Harper marched to the holding area, her jaw set. When she reached Ethan's cell, she opened the door herself. Mr. Cole, she said, her voice steady. You're being released. Ethan stood, his expression calm but guarded. On what grounds? Harper hesitated. Let's call it a reevaluation of the circumstances. Ethan's lips twitched into a wry smile. A misunderstanding, then? Something like that, Harper replied, stepping aside to let him pass. The moment Ethan emerged from the station, the crowd erupted into cheers. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and protesters chanted his name. Naomi was the first to reach him, wrapping him in a fierce hug. We've got your back, she whispered. Ethan nodded, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. Thank you, he said, his voice loud enough to carry. But this isn't over. Not for me, and not for anyone who believes in justice. The crowd roared in agreement, their voices rising in unison. Inside, Harper watched from the station steps, her expression unreadable. She knew the fight was far from over. Ethan Cole wasn't just walking out as a free man. He was walking out as a symbol of the community's demand for change. The energy outside the station was electric, with chants echoing into the night. As Ethan Cole made his way through the crowd, he maintained a calm, stoic demeanor. Every step he took toward freedom felt heavy, not just for himself but for the community watching him. Yet, in his mind, there was no relief, only the weight of what still needed to be done. Ethan, Naomi Blake caught up to him, her hand on his shoulder. Do you need a ride home? Or somewhere safe? Ethan shook his head, offering her a faint smile. Thank you, Naomi, but I'll be fine. I have some calls to make tonight. This is just the beginning. Naomi nodded, understanding the meaning behind his words. Let us know how we can help. Ethan paused, locking eyes with her. Keep the momentum going. They'll try to shift the narrative, but we can't let this moment slip away. As Naomi returned to the crowd, Ethan pulled out his phone. Ignoring the flood of missed calls and texts, he dialed the one person he trusted most, his sister, Layla Cole. Ethan. Layla's voice was a mix of relief and worry. Are you okay? I've been watching the news all day. I'm fine, Ethan said, though the exhaustion in his voice betrayed him. But things are about to get messy. I need to know if you're ready for that. Layla's voice steadied. You already know my answer. I've got your back, no matter what. Good, Ethan replied. I'll explain everything soon. For now, just be careful. Inside the station, Lieutenant Grace Harper was in her office, pacing. Her computer screen displayed search results for Ethan Cole, each headline more damning for her department than the last. Civil rights attorney Ethan Cole exposes police misconduct in major city lawsuit. Systemic racism in law enforcement, the cases that changed everything. Harper sighed, closing her laptop. She knew Ethan wasn't just another high-profile figure. He was a force to be reckoned with. His arrest had been a catastrophic miscalculation. Her phone buzzed on the desk. She answered immediately. This is Harper, she said. Lieutenant, Agent Collins's calm but firm voice came through. I trust you've handled the release? Yes, Harper replied. But the fallout is already spiraling. I need more details about Ethan Cole's involvement with your investigation. Why wasn't I informed about any of this sooner? Collins hesitated for a moment. Lieutenant, Ethan Cole was intentionally kept off your radar to ensure the integrity of the operation. He's been gathering evidence against several officers in your precinct, evidence that could implicate high-ranking officials. His arrest jeopardized months of work. Harper's jaw tightened. How deep does this go? Deep, Collins said bluntly. We suspect your department has been involved in racial profiling, cover-ups, and even ties to organized crime. Cole was helping us build a case to bring it all down. Harper sat heavily in her chair, the weight of Collins's words pressing down on her. You're telling me my precinct is a hub for corruption? You said it, not me, Collins replied. But you need to decide where you stand in all of this, Harper. We need people on the inside who are willing to clean house. Harper's thoughts raced. She had suspected misconduct within the department, but never imagined it ran this deep. I'll cooperate, she said finally, but I need time to gather evidence. Time is running out, Collins warned. The spotlight is on your department now. Make your move quickly, or risk being caught in the fallout. The next morning, Harper arrived at the precinct early. The station was quieter than usual, the officers subdued after the chaos of the previous day. Harper walked past Jensen and Carter, who were at their desks, whispering. Harper stopped abruptly, turning to face them. Officers, she said, her tone sharp. My office. Now. Jensen and Carter exchanged uneasy glances before following her. Once the door was closed, Harper didn't waste any time. I want a full explanation of your actions yesterday. Why did you arrest Ethan Cole? Jensen leaned back in his chair, his expression smug. He fit the description of a suspect. We followed procedure. Procedure? Harper's voice rose, her frustration barely contained. You tackled an unarmed man who complied with your instructions. You arrested him for resisting arrest when he didn't resist. That's not procedure, that's profiling. Carter fidgeted but said nothing. I've already begun reviewing the body cam footage, Harper continued, her voice icy. And let me be clear. If I find evidence of misconduct, you'll be facing more than suspension. Jensen's smirk faltered. You're blowing this out of proportion, Lieutenant. We were just doing our job. No, Harper snapped. You were abusing your power. While Harper dealt with the internal fallout, Ethan was in his office, reviewing files from his ongoing investigations. Piles of documents and USB drives littered his desk, each containing crucial evidence he'd gathered over months. He called Naomi, who picked up immediately. Ethan, what's the plan? Naomi asked. We're moving forward, Ethan said. I'm going to file a lawsuit against the department. It's time to bring this into the light. Naomi hesitated. You know they're going to fight back hard. I know, Ethan said, but I'm ready. Later that day, Harper found herself face-to-face with Chief Robert Doyle. We have a problem, Harper said, placing a stack of reports on his desk. Jensen and Carter's actions weren't just reckless, they were deliberate. And I've uncovered documents suggesting they're part of a larger pattern of misconduct. Doyle's face darkened. Are you accusing my officers of corruption? Yes, Harper said plainly. And if we don't act now, the federal investigation will tear this department apart. Doyle leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. What do you propose? Cooperate with the federal agents, Harper said. Suspend Jensen and Carter immediately, and start preparing for the fallout. Doyle rubbed his temples. This is a damn mess, Harper. It's our mess, Harper replied, and it's time we clean it up. That evening, a black SUV pulled up outside Ethan's office. Agent Collins stepped out, his expression unreadable. Ethan greeted him at the door, leading him into the office. Agent Collins, Ethan said, sitting behind his desk. To what do I owe the pleasure? Collins sat across from him, folding his hands. I came to warn you. Things are heating up, and your arrest has put everyone on edge. Be careful. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Careful isn't in my vocabulary, Agent. You know that. Collins smirked faintly. Fair enough. Just know this. We've got your back. But the next moves are on you. Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. Then let's make them count. The crowd outside the precinct swelled to nearly 1,000 people by the next morning. The chants, once sporadic, now came in unison, a thunderous cry for justice. Reporters and camera crews lined the sidewalks, capturing every moment of the growing movement. Signs reading, "End corruption," "Justice for Ethan," and "No more abuse of power," waved high above the heads of protesters. Naomi Blake stood on the steps of the precinct, a microphone in her hand, her voice cutting through the cacophony. This isn't just about Ethan Cole, she declared, her words carrying over the crowd. This is about every person who has been profiled, harassed, and silenced by a broken system. We demand accountability. We demand transparency. And we will not stop until we get it. The crowd erupted into cheers, their energy electrifying. Near the edge of the protest stood Layla Cole, Ethan's younger sister. She clutched a hand-painted sign that read, "My brother is a hero." Despite her attempts to stay strong, tears glistened in her eyes. Naomi noticed Layla and stepped down to join her. "You okay?" she asked softly, her tone a stark contrast to the fire she'd shown moments earlier. Layla nodded, though her voice wavered. "I just want him to be safe. He doesn't deserve any of this." Naomi placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Ethan is stronger than they know. And look around. He's not alone in this fight. We're all here for him." Layla gave a faint smile. "Thank you, Naomi." Inside the precinct, the atmosphere inside was the polar opposite of the roaring unity outside. The station buzzed with quiet tension. Officers avoided eye contact, their usual camaraderie replaced by unease. Lieutenant Grace Harper sat in her office, sifting through a pile of reports and complaints. The deeper she dug, the more patterns she uncovered. Unexplained arrests, missing evidence, and suspicious payouts. It wasn't just Jensen and Carter. This corruption ran deep. Her phone buzzed on the desk. It was Agent Collins. "Lieutenant," Collins said, his voice calm but urgent. "The situation outside is escalating. If we don't act soon, this could spiral out of control." "I'm working on it," Harper replied, "but I need more time. This department is a minefield, and I can't afford a single misstep." "You won't have time if the crowd breaks those barricades," Collins warned. "This isn't just a PR nightmare, it's a potential riot. And if that happens, it's over for all of us." Harper rubbed her temples, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "What do you suggest?" "Public action," Collins said firmly. "Suspend Jensen and Carter immediately. Announce a formal investigation. Show the public that you're serious about fixing this." "And the chief?" Harper asked. "I'll deal with him," Collins replied. The chief's reluctance. Chief Robert Doyle paced in his office, his jaw clenched. He could hear the chants growing louder, the crowd pressing closer to the station. Harper's voice cut through his frustration. "We have to suspend them," she said, standing firmly in front of his desk. Doyle slammed his fist onto the table. "Do you know what that will do to morale? To the department's reputation? Do you know what will happen if we don't?" Harper shot back. "The crowd outside isn't going away. The media is circling like vultures. And if you think this will blow over, you're delusional." Doyle glared at her but said nothing. Harper pressed on. "This is bigger than you, bigger than me. It's about restoring trust in this department. If we don't act now, We lose everything. Doyle sank into his chair, defeated. Fine. Do it. The announcement. Minutes later, Harper stepped out onto the steps of the precinct, a microphone in hand. The crowd quieted, their anticipation palpable. As of today, Harper began, her voice steady, Officers Jensen and Carter have been suspended pending a full investigation into their actions. The crowd roared in approval, but Harper raised a hand to quiet them. This is just the beginning, she continued. We are committed to uncovering the truth and holding anyone involved in misconduct accountable. This department will not tolerate corruption, and we are working closely with federal investigators to ensure transparency. From the edge of the crowd, Ethan Cole stood watching, his expression unreadable. He had avoided the spotlight since his release, choosing instead to observe the movement from a distance. But as Harper spoke, he felt a flicker of hope. Naomi's challenge. After Harper's announcement, Naomi approached Ethan. "What do you think?" she asked. Ethan crossed his arms, his gaze fixed on the station. "It's a start, but words are cheap. Actions matter." Naomi nodded. "Then let's make sure they act. The momentum is with us, Ethan. We can use this to push for real change." Ethan turned to her, his expression serious. "We need more than protests. We need a plan. Community oversight, independent investigations, legal accountability. It all starts here." Naomi smiled. "That's why we need you. This fight is yours as much as it's ours." A brewing storm. Inside the station, Jensen and Carter sat in the locker room, their faces grim. "This is bull," Carter muttered, slamming his locker shut. "They're hanging us out to dry. What did you expect?" Jensen snapped. "Cole isn't just some random guy. He's connected, and now we're the scapegoats." Carter's eyes darted around nervously. What if they dig too deep? What if they find? "Shut up," Jensen hissed. "Nobody's finding anything. We keep quiet, and this will blow over." But deep down, both men knew the walls were closing in. The tipping point. As night fell, the protest showed no signs of slowing. Naomi and Layla stayed at the forefront, rallying the crowd with chants and speeches. The atmosphere was charged, but the protesters remained peaceful. Ethan, however, sensed the precariousness of the situation. He knew how quickly things could spiral out of control. Agent Collins approached him quietly. "You need to speak," Collins said. Ethan frowned. "To who?" "The crowd," Collins replied. "They're looking to you for leadership. If you don't guide this movement, someone else will, and it might not end peacefully." Ethan hesitated. He had always been more comfortable fighting in courtrooms than on podiums. But this was different. This was personal. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped up to the microphone. The crowd fell silent as he began to speak. Ethan's call to action. "My name is Ethan Cole," he said, his voice carrying over the sea of faces. "I am a civil rights attorney, but more importantly, I am a member of this community. What happened to me could have happened to any of you. That's why we're here. Not just for me, but for justice." The crowd erupted in applause, but Ethan raised a hand to quiet them. "Real change doesn't happen overnight," he continued. "It happens when we come together and demand better. When we hold the powerful accountable and refuse to accept anything less than equality. This is our moment to push for that change. But it has to be peaceful. It has to be strategic. And it has to be relentless." The crowd cheered louder than ever, their energy renewed. Ethan stepped back, his heart pounding. For the first time, he felt the full weight of what they were fighting for, and the hope that they could actually win. The precinct was quiet that night, but the air inside felt charged. Lieutenant Grace Harper sat at her desk, poring over files, emails, and evidence she had quietly compiled over the past 24 hours. She felt a chill every time a new piece of the puzzle fell into place. This wasn't just about Officers Jensen and Carter. This was systemic. She glanced at her phone. Agent David Collins was due back soon, bringing updates from his team. Harper needed to connect the dots before he arrived. On her screen was an email thread from a source within the department's internal affairs. It detailed years of complaints against certain officers, claims of harassment, evidence tampering, and even payouts to silence victims. Most of these complaints had mysteriously been dismissed. She leaned back in her chair, her thoughts swirling. The question that haunted her was simple. How deep does this go? Ethan's vigilance. In a modest office space across town, Ethan Cole sat with Naomi Blake and a small group of trusted activists and attorneys. The room was cluttered with laptops, legal pads, and coffee cups. Naomi was mid-sentence, her voice passionate. The protests are strong, but they're not enough. We need to pressure city officials, demand oversight committees, and push for new policies. Ethan nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. Agreed. But we need to balance that with concrete legal actions. Public pressure can drive change, but lawsuits ensure accountability. One of the younger attorneys, Derek Patel, leaned forward. Ethan, what about the internal investigation? Can we trust the department to handle this fairly? Ethan's gaze hardened. No, that's why we keep digging on our end. If they try to sweep this under the rug, we'll have the evidence to expose them. A break in the case. Back at the precinct, Harper heard a knock at her door. She looked up to see Agent Collins standing there, a file folder in hand. Lieutenant, he said, stepping inside and closing the door. We have a problem and an opportunity. Harper motioned for him to continue. Collins placed the folder on her desk and flipped it open. Inside were documents, photos, and transcripts. These are surveillance logs from a separate investigation, Collins began. They confirmed that Jensen and Carter weren't acting alone. They were following orders. Whose orders? Harper asked, leaning forward. Collins hesitated. Chief Robert Doyle. Harper's blood ran cold. You're telling me the chief of police ordered the wrongful arrest of a civil rights attorney? Collins nodded. And it gets worse. We've traced a series of payments to an off-the-books account tied to the precinct. We suspect it's been used to fund bribes and cover-ups. Harper clenched her fists. So, the corruption goes all the way to the top. Exactly, Collins replied. And we have enough to take action, but we need to do it carefully. If Doyle catches wind of this before we're ready, he'll destroy evidence in close ranks. Harper's gamble. Harper knew the risks, but she also knew they couldn't wait. What's the plan? She asked. Collins smirked. I thought you'd never ask. Over the next hour, they hashed out a strategy. Collins's team would issue subpoenas for the precinct's financial records, while Harper would quietly collect testimony from trusted officers. The goal was to build an airtight case against Doyle and his co-conspirators. A dangerous interruption. As Harper worked late into the night, the precinct's lights dimmed, and the usual noise of ringing phones and clattering keyboards faded. She was alone in her office when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated but answered. Lieutenant Harper. The voice on the other end was low and menacing. You're playing with fire, Lieutenant. Harper's heart raced, but her voice remained steady. Who is this? That doesn't matter, the voice replied. What matters is that you drop this investigation. If you don't, things will get messy. The line went dead. Harper stared at the phone, her grip tightening. She wasn't scared. She was furious. Doyle's unraveling. The next morning, the station was a hive of activity. Officers were whispering about the growing protests and the mounting pressure from federal investigators. Chief Doyle paced in his office, his usual stern demeanor replaced by visible agitation. When Harper entered without knocking, Doyle glared at her. Lieutenant, this better be important. It is, Harper replied, her tone icy. She dropped a stack of files onto his desk. What's this? Doyle asked, flipping through the papers. Evidence, Harper said. Evidence that links you to years of corruption, including yesterday's arrest of Ethan Cole. Doyle froze, his face darkening. You're accusing me? Harper crossed her arms. I'm not accusing. I'm stating facts. And if you have any integrity left, you'll cooperate with the investigation. Doyle's expression twisted with rage. Do you have any idea what you're doing? You're destroying this department. No, Harper shot back. You destroyed it. I'm just trying to save what's left. Before Doyle could respond, the door opened, and Agent Collins stepped in, flanked by two federal marshals. Robert Doyle, Collins announced, his voice authoritative. You're under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and misuse of public funds. Doyle's face turned ashen. You can't do this. Collins nodded to the marshals, who stepped forward to handcuff Doyle. We just did. The fallout. News of Doyle's arrest spread like wildfire. By midday, every major news outlet was covering the story. The once smug faces of Officers Jensen and Carter were nowhere to be seen. They had both been taken into custody for their roles in the corruption. Naomi Blake addressed the crowd of protesters, her voice triumphant. We've taken the first step, but the fight isn't over. This is about more than just one department. It's about dismantling a system that's failed us for far too long. Ethan stood beside her, his hand resting on Layla's shoulder. He felt a mix of relief and determination. The arrests were a victory, but he knew the road ahead would be long. A private moment. Later that evening, Harper found Ethan standing alone outside the precinct, staring at the sky. You did it, she said, walking up to him. Ethan shook his head. We did it. And this is just the beginning? Harper smiled faintly. You're right. But at least now, we have a chance. Ethan turned to her, his expression serious. You stood up when it mattered. That's rare in a system like this. Don't lose that. Harper nodded. And you keep fighting. The world needs people like you. They shook hands, both knowing their paths would cross again. The arrests of Chief Robert Doyle, Officers Jensen, and Carter marked a turning point, but the work had only just begun. The precinct was now under federal oversight, and tensions ran high among the remaining officers. Every desk, every file cabinet, and every locker was being scrutinized by investigators. Lieutenant Grace Harper was at the center of it all, balancing her regular duties with the mounting pressure of rebuilding trust in a department tarnished by scandal. The Cole Justice Initiative. At a bustling community center across town, Ethan Cole stood before a group of activists, attorneys, and volunteers. The air in the room was charged with purpose. Naomi Blake took the floor first. Today, we're launching the Cole Justice Initiative. This is about more than one precinct or one city. It's about systemic change across the board. The room erupted in applause, and Naomi gestured for Ethan to speak. Ethan stepped up, his voice calm but commanding. This initiative is about holding the powerful accountable. We'll provide free legal aid for victims of police misconduct, push for independent oversight of law enforcement, and work to implement new policies that ensure justice is served, not just for the privileged but for everyone. He paused, scanning the room. But let me be clear, this won't be easy. Change never is. We're going to face resistance. We're going to be tested. But if we stand together, there's nothing we can't accomplish. The crowd roared in agreement, and Ethan stepped down, his heart pounding. He had fought countless battles in courtrooms, but this felt different. It felt bigger. Inside the precinct, Lieutenant Harper sat across from Officer Sarah Johnson, one of the newest recruits. Sarah had been visibly shaken by the events of the past few days, but had shown a genuine desire to help. Officer Johnson, Harper began, her tone measured. How are you holding up? Sarah hesitated before replying. It's been tough, Lieutenant, but I joined this force to make a difference, and I'm not giving up. Harper nodded, a hint of pride in her expression. Good. We need people like you. As part of our efforts to rebuild trust, we're forming a community oversight board. You'll be working with them directly, attending public forums, and taking feedback from residents. Are you up for it? Sarah straightened in her chair. Absolutely. Harper smiled. That's the spirit. The Legal Aid Clinic. Meanwhile, the Legal Aid Clinic under the Cole Justice Initiative was already in full swing. Ethan worked late into the night alongside his team, reviewing case after case of police misconduct. One case stood out, a young man named Terrence Baker, who had been wrongfully imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit. The evidence against him was flimsy at best, and Ethan was determined to secure his release. This is exactly why we're here, Ethan told his team. We're not just fighting for policies, we're fighting for people. Derek Patel nodded. I'll handle the filing. We should have a hearing within a month. Ethan looked around the room, seeing the determination on every face. He knew the fight would be grueling, but moments like this reminded him why it was worth it. Community oversight takes shape. At a town hall meeting later that week, Naomi Blake and Grace Harper sat side by side, addressing a room packed with concerned citizens. The newly formed Community Oversight Board was the main topic of discussion. Naomi stood first, her voice strong and resolute. This board isn't just a formality. It's a direct line between the community and law enforcement. We're here to ensure that your voices are heard and your concerns are addressed. Harper followed, her tone steady. As a member of this department, I can't promise perfection, but I can promise accountability. With your help, we can build a system that works for everyone. The crowd responded with cautious applause. There was still skepticism, but Harper and Naomi had planted the seeds of trust, resistance, and progress. Despite the strides being made, not everyone embraced the changes. Some officers resented the federal oversight and the new policies being implemented. Harper faced subtle pushback from within the department, cold shoulders in the hallways, muttered comments under breath, but she refused to back down. Change is uncomfortable, she told her team during a meeting, but if you're here to serve and protect, you'll adapt. If you can't, there's the door. Her no-nonsense approach earned her respect from some and fear from others. But Harper didn't care about being liked. She cared about doing what was right. Terrence's freedom. A month later, Ethan and his team successfully secured Terrence Baker's release. The young man walked out of the courthouse a free man, tears streaming down his face as he embraced his mother. Ethan stood nearby, watching the reunion with a satisfied smile. Moments like this made the long nights and endless battles worthwhile. Naomi joined him, her arms crossed. One down, 1,000 to go. Ethan chuckled. We'll take it one case at a time. A new kind of training. Back at the precinct, Harper implemented a mandatory de-escalation training program for all officers. Ethan was invited to speak to the recruits during one of the sessions. Standing before a room of young officers, Ethan began. When you put on that badge, you take on an enormous responsibility. It's not just about enforcing the law, it's about respecting the people you serve. Justice isn't just a word, it's a principle, and it starts with how you treat every individual you encounter. The room was silent, but Ethan could see the impact his words were having. After the session, several recruits approached him, thanking him for sharing his story. The shift. Over the next few months, small but meaningful changes began to take root. The Community Oversight Board held regular meetings, fostering open dialogue between residents and officers. The legal aid clinic continued to win cases, and the precinct slowly earned back some of the trust it had lost. Harper and Ethan kept in close contact, supporting each other as they navigated the challenges ahead. Do you think we're making a difference? Harper asked one evening after a particularly long day. Ethan nodded. We are. Change doesn't happen overnight, but every step we take matters. Harper smiled faintly. Then let's keep stepping. 6 months after the tumultuous events that had rocked the city, change was undeniably in the air. The protests had long since quieted, but their echoes lingered in the transformed systems and attitudes within the community. For the first time in years, there was hope. The police precinct was now under strict federal oversight, with new policies implemented to ensure transparency and accountability. Officers underwent rigorous training in de-escalation tactics and cultural competency. The Community Oversight Board had become a powerful force, reviewing cases, advising policy changes, and acting as a bridge between law enforcement and the citizens they served. But as Ethan Cole had often reminded his team, the fight for justice is never truly over. Ethan's new role. The Cole Justice Initiative was thriving. What had started as a small grassroots effort now operated out of a dedicated office building, staffed with attorneys, caseworkers, and volunteers. Every day, they received calls and emails from people seeking help, some local, others from neighboring states. Ethan stood in the conference room, reviewing a report with Naomi Blake and Derek Patel. This is incredible, Naomi said, flipping through the document. The initiative has handled over 200 cases in 6 months. That's 200 lives changed. Ethan smiled faintly. It's a start, but there's so much more to do. We've barely scratched the surface. Derek chimed in. That's why we've been talking about expanding. More staff, more resources. If we keep up this momentum, we can make this a national model. Ethan nodded. Let's make it happen. A revisit to the precinct. One crisp morning, Ethan found himself back at the precinct, not as a suspect or an adversary, but as a partner. Lieutenant Grace Harper had invited him to speak to a group of recruits during their orientation. As he walked through the familiar halls, he noted the differences. The energy was different. Officers greeted him with respect, some even extending their hands to thank him for his work. It was a far cry from the hostility he had once faced here. Harper met him at the door to the training room. "Thanks for coming, Ethan," she said, shaking his hand warmly. "The recruits are eager to hear from you." Ethan smiled. "I'm happy to be here. Let's get started." Inside, about 50 young officers sat in rows, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Ethan took his place at the front of the room and began to speak. "My name is Ethan Cole," he started, his voice calm and steady. "I'm here today to talk about justice. Not the kind written in statutes or enforced through handcuffs, but the kind that starts with respect. The kind that recognizes the dignity of every person you encounter, no matter who they are or where they come from." The room was silent, the recruits hanging on his every word. Ethan shared his story, not to lecture but to illuminate. He spoke about his wrongful arrest, the protests that followed, and the changes that were born from that moment. "When you put on that uniform," he said, "you have the power to change lives, for better or worse. Use it wisely. Serve with honor, and remember that justice is a responsibility, not a privilege." As he finished, the recruits erupted into applause. One of them, Sarah Johnson, approached him afterward. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice tinged with nervousness, "thank you for sharing your story. It's the reason I joined the force, to make a difference." Ethan smiled warmly. "Then do it, Sarah. The community needs people like you." The Education Initiative. At the same time, the Cole Justice Initiative expanded into schools. Carmen Diaz, a passionate local teacher and one of Ethan's closest allies, spearheaded the education program. Carmen stood in front of a group of high school students, holding their attention with a mix of humor and sincerity. "We're here to talk about your rights," she said, pacing the classroom. "Knowing your rights isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about understanding the system and making it better." The curriculum covered everything from civil rights to civic participation, empowering students to become active, informed citizens. Ethan visited one of these classrooms one afternoon and watched as a young student raised his hand. "What if the system is broken?" the boy asked. Ethan stepped in to answer. "Then you fix it, piece by piece. It takes time, and it's hard, but every voice matters, including yours." The final case. One of the most significant cases the Cole Justice Initiative handled in its first year involved Angela Brooks, a single mother wrongfully convicted of drug possession. The evidence against her had been fabricated by officers with ties to the corrupt network Ethan had helped expose. In court, Ethan delivered a powerful argument, laying out the truth with precision and passion. "The justice system failed Angela Brooks," he told the jury. "But today, we have the opportunity to make it right. Not just for her, but for every person who's been wrongfully accused and forgotten by the system." Angela was acquitted, and the officers involved were prosecuted. The victory sent shockwaves through the city, a reminder that the fight for justice was still alive and well. A community united. At a celebration marking the one-year anniversary of the Cole Justice Initiative, the community gathered in a local park. Families, activists, and even officers stood side by side, united in their commitment to progress. Naomi Blake took the stage first, her voice filled with pride. "This isn't just about what we've accomplished. It's about what we're building, a future where justice is real for everyone." Ethan spoke next. "This journey started with pain and injustice, but it led us here, to a movement that's bigger than any one person. Together, we've proven that change is possible, and we're just getting started." The crowd erupted into cheers, their energy a testament to the power of unity. A quiet reflection. That evening, Ethan returned to his office, the noise of the celebration still echoing in his mind. He sat at his desk, staring at a framed photo of his late father. "You were right, Dad," he said softly. "Staying calm, staying strong, it works. But it takes a village." A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Naomi. "You ready for tomorrow?" she asked, grinning. Ethan chuckled. "I'm always ready." Naomi leaned against the doorframe. "We've come a long way, Ethan. But there's still so much to do. Ethan nodded, a determined smile on his face. Then let's get to work. Epilogue. As the city settled into the quiet of the night, the stars above seemed brighter. The journey for justice was far from over, but the foundation had been laid. And for Ethan Cole, Lieutenant Grace Harper, Naomi Blake, and the countless others who had joined the fight, the path forward was clear. Justice wasn't just a word. It was a way of life.